Usually when we talk about diagnosing a problem, especially a medical one, there's this universal expectation of precision.
Right, yeah. Like engineering.
Exactly. It's like if you fall and break your arm, you go to the hospital, they take an x-ray, and it shows that unmistakable, jagged white line across the bone. The doctor just points to the screen and says, there it is.
Right. It's binary, it's objective. There's really no debate about the lived experience of the humerus bone.
Right. Broken or not broken, it's clean, and more importantly, it's comforting. We naturally like things to be visible and neatly categorized.
Especially when it comes to fixing something that's wrong with us or, our kids.
Exactly. But then you step into the world of modern education, you step into childhood neurodevelopment, emotional wellness, behavioral tracking, and suddenly that x-ray machine is completely shattered.
Yeah, completely.
We are looking at a diagnostic landscape right now that is honestly incredibly murky. It's subjective, it's shifting, and it affects almost every single family.
And that murkiness isn't just an accident of bureaucracy either. According to the text we're examining today, that ambiguity is the actual engine of a very specific type of control.
Which brings us perfectly to today's focus. But real quick, before we wade into these muddy waters, I want to formally welcome you to this deep dive.
Yes, welcome.
And if you're joining us today, please take a quick second right now to like and subscribe on whatever platform you are using to listen. It directly helps us bring more in-depth, long-form analyses of the world's most fascinating and controversial sources directly to you.
Yeah, it genuinely makes a huge difference for the show, so thank you.
Okay, so let's get into today's source material. We are unpacking a highly polarizing, incredibly provocative new 2026 ebook by Connie Riker.
Very provocative.
Right. It's titled Social and Emotional Learning, Crippling Children's Self-Regulation and Resilience. And let me tell you right out of the gate, this is a fiery cultural critique.
Fiery might be an understatement, honestly.
It attempts to take everything we fundamentally assume about modern education, specifically how we talk to children about their feelings, and just turn it completely upside down.
Yeah, it is a relentless, unapologetic deconstruction of the modern classroom.
Now, before we get into the weeds, I get to make a very, very crucial disclaimer here. This book contains highly politically charged content.
Extremely.
It touches on intense, explosive debates about gender, education, cultural Marxism, and the very biological foundations of childhood. So let me be absolutely clear to you, the listener.
We are not taking sides here.
Exactly. Our goal is to impartially unpack the fascinating, explosive arguments contained in this original source material so you can fully understand the cultural conversation without us endorsing the viewpoints ourselves.
Right. Our job today is synthesis and analysis. We are mapping the architecture of the author's argument. We just want you to understand how she builds her case.
Regardless of whether you end up agreeing with her conclusion. So let's set the stage. The core premise of Riker's book is that social and emotional learning, what we all know by the acronym SEL, is not actually an educational tool.
Right.
She argues that it is a matriarchal cult designed specifically to suppress masculinity and manufacture emotionally fragile, highly compliant children. She basically argues that this system is driven by a female supremacist feminist audience who are possessed by their negative animus, allied with cultural Marxists, and they are actively attacking masculinity and Western civilization.
It's a total paradigm shift in how we are asked to view the classroom. And again, that's her intense framing of the situation.
Right, and again, we are just reporting what the book says.
Exactly. She isn't arguing that schools are failing to implement SEL correctly.
Yeah.
She's arguing that SEL is functioning exactly as designed. And in her view, that design is a conversion apparatus.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because if you're a parent listening to this right now, you're probably looking at your kid's feelings wheel on the fridge and experiencing a bit of whiplash.
I'm sure they are.
I mean, we've been told for a decade that emotional intelligence is the absolute holy grail of parenting.
Yeah.
But in the preface, Riker goes right for the throat regarding this vocabulary. She lists words we hear every single day. Words like self-regulation, resilience, growth mindset.
To most of us, these sound like inherently positive, healthy things.
Right. But she describes this exact vocabulary as a color printed in bright type. She claims schools are no longer neutral spaces of learning, but are actually run by a therapeutic bureaucracy.
What's fascinating here is how the author frames the very concept of care as a Trojan horse.
Oh, that's an interesting way to put it.
Yeah. Riker argues that the language of therapy has been intentionally weaponized. It was engineered to sound soft, clinical, and compassionate so that parents, and she particularly points to mothers here, would enforce institutional compliance against their own children without even noticing what they were doing.
Wait, walk me through that. How does care become a weapon?
Well, she writes that this vocabulary actually replaces critical thought. Think about it. You sit in a parent-teacher conference, and the teacher starts using phrases like safe space, emotional vocabulary, and dysregulation.
Yeah, that happens all the time.
Right. And you nod along because that is what a modern, quote unquote, emotionally intelligent parent is supposed to do. You don't question the curriculum, because to question it is to admit you lack empathy.
Right. She explicitly says that dissent is framed as a lack of awareness. If you, as a parent, question why your kid spends 40 minutes a day talking about their anxieties instead of doing math, well, you are the problem.
Exactly. You're labeled unregulated.
Well, let me stop you there because the author makes this huge leap. She says that the calm down corner or the peace corner in a kindergarten classroom is functioning with the exact same underlying logic as a prison cell.
Yeah, that's one of her strongest claims.
That sounds incredibly overdramatic, right? I mean, isn't giving a hyperactive kid a quiet place to sit with some pillows just like good classroom management? How does she justify that comparison?
She justifies it by examining the underlying power dynamic.
Okay.
In a prison, the state dictates where your physical body goes, how you express yourself, and what constitutes a violation of order. Riker argues the calm down corner does the exact same thing, but to a child's internal landscape.
So it's not about the physical space, it's about the emotional jurisdiction.
Exactly.
Yeah.
She argues it's not about genuinely giving a child a space to process a complex emotion. Instead, it is an exorcism of behavior that inconveniences the institution.
Wow, an exorcism.
She explicitly claims that when a child is forced to go sit in a corner and color in a feelings chart because they were fidgeting, they are being taught a very specific lesson.
Which is?
That their subjective internal reality is subordinate to the institution's demand for quiet compliance.
And here is where it gets really controversial because she ties this directly to gender. She makes this highly specific historical claim about the word resilience. She says it was deliberately introduced into pedagogical vocabulary at the exact moment in history when women began demanding institutional accountability for male violence.
Yes, she frames resilience not as a biological capacity to bounce back from hardship, which is how we normally use the word.
Right.
She frames it as a managerial tool. In her view, the modern therapeutic state needed a sanitized way to manage male behavior. What she views as natural kinetic, competitive, physical energy was suddenly labeled as a lack of resilience or a lack of regulation.
So it sounds like the author is saying modern education treats male kinetic energy the way a bad mechanic treats a warning light on a dashboard.
Oh, that's a great way to think about it.
Instead of looking under the hood to see what the engine is naturally trying to do, they just smash the bulb with a hammer. Or in this case, dose the kid with medication so the dashboard goes dark and the classroom stays quiet.
That is a perfect analogy for her argument. Instead of male energy being seen as a natural force to be channeled into something productive, it is instantly categorized as a deficit requiring therapeutic intervention.
But identifying this therapeutic vocabulary is only half the battle, right? I mean, if the classroom is essentially a prison cell of the mind and the vocabulary is the bars, how is this actually enforced when a child inevitably acts out?
Right, because kids are always going to act out.
Because in chapter 1, which she titles The Seed of the Cult, she breaks down early childhood interactions in a way that is meticulously chilling. She doesn't just talk in abstract theory.
No, she goes right to the sandbox.
Yes, the sandbox as the first altar. Let's unpack the Seattle anecdote. She gives this striking example of a 5-year-old boy in a Seattle public schools kindergarten. He's just sitting at his desk and he taps his pencil 3 times. Tap, tap, tap. It's rhythmic, absent-minded motor overflow. He's a 5-year-old boy.
Totally normal behavior.
But the little girl sitting next to him turns to the teacher and says, "I feel unsafe."
Which is a phrase she specifically learned in their second step morning SEL meeting. It's pre-programmed vocabulary.
Exactly. And what is the result of that interaction? The boy is immediately removed from the circle. His pencil is confiscated, his name goes on a behavioral tracker, and his mother gets a very serious email full of therapy jargon about dysregulation and the need for repair.
Meanwhile, the girl gets a sticker for using her feeling words.
Right. I read that and thought, okay, it's an overreaction by a stressed teacher, but Riker says, no, this is the system working perfectly.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, Riker is mapping what she calls the tantrum to triumph loop.
The tantrum to triumph loop.
Yeah. She posits a fascinating evolutionary psychology argument here. She states that toddler tears and complaints are absolutely not pure expressions of developmental distress.
Okay, what are they then?
They are cold-blooded adaptive strategies forged by natural selection to extract resources and attention from adults.
So when that little girl says, I feel unsafe, Riker is arguing she doesn't actually feel in physical danger from a tapping pencil. And a 5-year-old knows a pencil isn't a weapon. She feels the opportunity for social power.
Precisely. Riker argues that children are incredible, intuitive systems adapters. They walk into a room, they map the adult incentives, and they figure out what behaviors get them the most power and the most praise.
Wow.
In a traditional classroom, you got praise for answering a math problem correctly. In an SEL classroom, you get praise for claiming vulnerability.
And the book claims that female teachers who have been conditioned by decades of this specific pedagogy consistently misinterpret identical emotional displays based entirely on the sex of the child.
Yeah, she pulls in meta-analyses out of the University of Georgia and the Norwegian Institute of Public Health to back this up.
Right. She argues that if a boy shouts on the playground, it is instantly labeled aggressive. If a girl shouts, it is labeled passionate or assertive. A boy crying out of frustration is dysregulated, but a girl crying is processing.
This is the crux of her argument regarding how subjective emotion replaces objective evidence. Think about the Seattle anecdote. The objective, observable physical reality is that a pencil was tapped 3 times. It poses 0 physical threat. But the subjective emotion, the girl claiming she feels unsafe, is treated as the higher truth.
Wow. Yeah, I see what you mean.
If a 5-year-old's subjective claim of feeling unsafe over a pencil tap can trigger an official disciplinary protocol against another student, the state has achieved ultimate control over reality.
It's exactly like a legal system. The author views this emotional vocabulary as accumulating legal weight over time.
Yes.
A 5-year-old saying, I feel unsafe in the sandbox, is utilizing the exact same mechanism as a 25-year-old filing a weaponized HR complaint or initiating a Title IX investigation on a college campus.
Exactly.
The vocabulary doesn't expire as they grow up, it just grows heavier and more legally binding.
That is the exact historical through line she draws. She argues that feminist jurists and educational theorists understood decades ago that whoever commands the emotional lexicon of the child ultimately commands the legal lexicon of the adult.
That's a profound thought.
When subjective distress is treated as a sacred, unquestionable text, and a spoken feeling is treated not as a description of a mood, but as a legal verdict against someone else, you have fundamentally replaced evidence with emotion as the foundation of public order.
Which is an incredibly dark, almost dystopian lens to view a kindergarten classroom through. I can hear parents listening to this just recoiling.
Oh, definitely.
But she anticipates that reaction, and she says, look at the data. Is there actual data to support this idea that children are being fundamentally psychologically altered by these programs? Because if we only have anecdotes, this is just, philosophical musing.
This leads us directly into her critique of the medicalization of boyhood, where she moves from the anecdotal to the statistical. She points to very specific district rollouts to make her case that these programs are actually generating the anxiety they claim to cure.
Right, let's talk about the Portland data. She brings up statistics regarding the Portland Public Schools' implementation of a program called the Well-Being Index.
Right.
This was rolled out during the 2018-2019 academic year.
Yes, and the numbers she presents are staggering. The book claims that within just 18 months of this SEL rollout across the elementary grades, anxiety diagnoses among children aged 5 to 8 rose by 43%.
Wait, 43%? In 18 months?
Yeah.
A massive spike.
You don't see a 43% spike in a medical diagnosis unless there is, like, an environmental toxin introduced or the diagnostic criteria are completely warped.
Exactly.
And she connects this massive spike directly to the mechanics of the daily feeling check-in. But how does a survey, something designed to catch anxiety, actually cause a 43% spike?
She explains the mechanism by describing the daily feeling check-in as an atheist's prayer book. In this scenario, the teacher acts as the matron priestess.
The matron priestess, got it.
Every single morning, children walk into the classroom and are immediately forced to confess their internal state: happy, sad, frustrated, anxious often, by placing a clothespin on a giant color-coded feelings wheel in front of their peers.
So they are publicly logging their emotional state before they even take their coats off. Exactly. Riker argues that by forcing children to constantly monitor, excavate, and articulate their internal weather to a state authority figure, you aren't teaching them to cope.
What are you doing then?
You are colonizing their interiority. You're manufacturing a hyper-awareness of emotion. If you ask a perfectly fine 7-year-old every morning, "Are you anxious today? What about today? Are you feeling safe?" Eventually that child is going to start pathologizing their normal, fleeting moods as clinical anxiety.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because she takes this data and ties it directly to her radical views on male biology. She absolutely rejects the old adage, boys will be boys.
She does.
And not for the reason you'd think. Usually we reject that phrase to say, hey, we shouldn't excuse bad behavior just because it's a boy. But Riker rejects it because she says the phrase implies male biology is something that merely needs to be tolerated.
Right, she argues male biology, which she defines as kinetic, competitive, physical, and outward-facing, is purposeful. It is what she calls logos. She argues it is the very biological drive that built bridges, explored continents, and authored constitutions.
But in the modern classroom, she says that exact energy is treated as a defect. The system actively seeks what she calls the psychological castration of boys.
That's a heavy phrase.
Really is. If a boy fidgets, or pushes back, or simply refuses to sit cross-legged and engage in the morning feeling circle, his natural male drive is immediately reframed as a trauma response or a regulatory failure.
Yes.
He gets a label, he gets a diagnosis, and then he gets drugged into compliance so he doesn't threaten the estrogen-centric ecosystem of the classroom.
And she uses the phrase estrogen-only classroom quite deliberately.
Right.
She argues that decades of institutional feminism has pathologized the male presence in early education to the point where an adult male teacher is often viewed with latent suspicion. Meanwhile, female authority is absolute and unquestioned.
It's a bold claim. She's essentially saying that the ADHD diagnosis epidemic is largely a tool of social control.
That's her argument. The goal isn't symptom management for a genuine neurological disorder. She claims the ultimate objective is the creation of a permanent, dependent, patient class of young males.
Wow.
Their nervous systems are colonized by pharmaceutical intervention before they can even read, ensuring they never develop the friction or the assertiveness that might challenge the matriarchal structure of the school.
Because a drugged boy is a safe boy. And a safe boy is a perfectly obedient subject. It's a terrifying pipeline she's proposing. But this naturally leads to the next question.
Which is?
If physical energy, competition, and masculine drive are being actively punished and pathologized, what exactly is the system rewarding? If you succeed in this system, what does that success look like?
This brings us to Chapter 4, which she titles The Female Crown. Here, she shifts her focus from behavior to academics, launching a vicious critique of what it actually means to be competent in a modern school.
And she takes direct aim at CASEL, the Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning. For our listeners who might not know, CASEL is the behemoth behind the modern SEL movement.
They really are.
They provide the core 5-competency framework that is used in thousands of school districts across the country.
They are the architects of the curriculum. And the irony she points out regarding their success is staggering. SEL has exploded into a $2.5 billion industry. It is ubiquitous.
Yeah, it's everywhere.
But at the exact same time, National Assessment of Educational Progress, the NAEP scores, which are often called the nation's report card, in basic math and reading have completely plummeted.
No, a critic might say, well, correlation doesn't equal causation. Test scores dropped because of the pandemic or underfunding. How does Riker argue that SEL is actually causing the drop in academic competence?
She argues it through the mechanism of displacement. Time is a finite resource in a school day.
Yeah.
When schools dedicate 45 minutes every morning to feeling circles and mandate that teachers must stop math lessons to process minor peer conflicts using restorative justice scripts, they are physically displacing instructional time.
That makes sense.
The compounding loss of rigorous academic hours over 12 years mathematically guarantees lower NAEP scores.
And she provides very specific examples to highlight this. She points to California, which leads the nation in aggressive SEL adoption and mandates. But California also leads in college remediation rates.
Yeah.
She notes that over 60% of California State University entrants in 2023 required remedial math or English.
Let that sink in. Over 60% of students admitted to the state university system cannot perform at a basic college level.
60% are functionally illiterate or mathematically incapable, but hey, they know exactly how to name their feelings on a color wheel.
Exactly. Riker argues that these students spent 12 years learning to journal about their emotional boundaries, but never actually learned how to factor a polynomial or parse a complex historical text. And to her, this correlation isn't an accident of core implementation. It is the fundamental business model of SEL.
Which brings up that incredible anecdote from Olympia, Washington. This one really stuck with me. A second grade boy is physically removed from his classroom and officially labeled dysregulated. Now, as a listener, you're probably thinking, why? Did he hit someone? Did he throw a chair? Did he scream at the teacher? No. He simply wanted to finish his math worksheet instead of putting his pencil down to participate in a mandatory feeling circle.
That's it. That was his offense.
The school interventionist actually wrote in his file that he displayed resistance to social awareness norms.
This raises an important question about the entire concept of emotional intelligence, or EQ, which is the bedrock of SEL. Riker goes after Daniel Goleman, the psychologist who popularized EQ in the 1990s, with absolute vengeance.
Right. Goleman is the one who convinced corporate America and the education system that EQ was just as important, if not more important, than IQ.
And Riker dismisses Goleman's EQ as a complete racket. She points out that unlike IQ, which has a century of psychometric testing, predictive reliability across various cultures and direct correlation to occupational success EQ is largely measured through self-report surveys.
You just tell them how empathetic you are.
You are literally asked to rate your own empathy. She compares its scientific weight to a Cosmopolitan magazine personality quiz.
It has almost no predictive value for actual academic or technical achievement.
Right. Her core argument here is that SEL fundamentally replaces testable competence with untestable compliance. Think about it. You can empirically prove whether a student knows how to solve an algebraic equation. You cannot empirically prove whether a student is being mindful or empathetic.
That's so true.
If the metric for success in a classroom shifts from a testable reality to a subjective vibe, or the ability to perform emotional vulnerability on demand, then actual rigorous competence is not just ignored, it's actively hunted as a threat.
Because genuine competence causes friction. If you are really good at math, you are going to finish early, you are going to get bored, and you are going to disrupt the harmonized pace of the classroom. So the author is arguing that the goal of SEL isn't to make kids emotionally healthy at all. The goal is to eliminate all discomfort.
Yeah.
And by doing so, you exterminate the friction required to build actual capability.
Exactly. What is competence? Competence means encountering a problem you cannot immediately solve and pushing through the deep frustration to solve it anyway.
Right.
It means standing in front of hostile strangers and making a coherent argument. It means failing, feeling terrible about it, and trying again.
Yeah.
Riker argues that SEL seeks to eliminate failure entirely through trauma-informed accommodations, no-zero grading policies, and reframing normal disappointment as a clinical event. You simply cannot produce a resilient adult by insulating them from every scraped knee and bruised feeling.
You don't produce a resilient adult, you produce a fragile client.
Yes, a highly compliant child who ages chronologically but never matures psychologically.
So if a child is rewarded purely for compliance and emotional performance in second grade, what happens when that child turns 18? What happens when they enter a college environment or a workplace that actually requires rigorous debate? This transitions us perfectly into segment 5, where she explores what she calls epistemic closure and the TikTok pipeline.
She uses the infamous 2017 incident at Evergreen State College with Professor Brett Weinstein as the ultimate inevitable manifestation of this K-12 programming.
Let's remind the listeners about that. Weinstein, a biology professor, refused to leave campus during a day of absence event where white community members were asked to go off campus. In response, throngs of students cornered him, screaming at him and explicitly claiming that his mere physical presence on campus was literal violence.
And at the time, people outside the education system looked at those viral videos and thought, these students are malfunctioning, they are hysterical, they have lost their minds.
Yeah, that was the general reaction.
But Riker says, no, you were completely missing the point. They were not malfunctioning at all. They were executing their 12 years of SEL programming with surgical precision.
Wait, how is screaming at a biology professor the intended result of learning about empathy?
Because, as Riker argues, they have been taught for 12 straight years that reason, logos, logic, debate is a patriarchal construct, a tool of the oppressor. If you spend 15 years in a school system that elevates subjective, lived emotional experience above objective reality, then logical argumentation isn't just a different style of communication. It is viewed as an assault.
So when Weinstein tried to debate them logically, he was violating the rules of their universe.
Yes. In the SEL moral universe, if feelings are the highest unquestionable authority, then contradicting a feeling is an act of existential violence.
Wow, that explains a lot.
When those students chanted that his presence was violence, they weren't speaking metaphorically, they meant it literally. Their ritualized emotional collapse, the screaming, the crying, it was the only weapon they had ever been taught to use, and it functioned brilliantly as both a shield to avoid debate and a sword to get him fired.
It's what she calls epistemic closure, an epistemological bubble. A sealed ideological chamber where logic isn't just debated and found wanting, it is completely reclassified as aggression. And the way she describes social media's role in accelerating this closure is visceral.
Yeah, she really goes after social media.
She points to those very real 2022 TikTok videos of California teachers openly, gleefully bragging to their followers about hiding SEL and gender curricula from parents.
Which Riker frames not just as bad judgment by a few teachers, but as actual counterintelligence operations conducted against families by agents of their own government.
Right, she views the school as the state, severing the bond between parent and child. And then she looks at the teenagers themselves on TikTok and she notes this is overwhelmingly adolescent girls who are displaying alters. We've all seen these videos.
Oh, yeah.
Teenagers claiming to have dissociative identity disorder with elaborate backstories, different pronouns for each alter, different self-diagnosed mental illnesses. Riker calls it a bizarre commodification of trauma, the industrialization of demonic possession.
I know that phrase sounds extreme, but if we connect this to the bigger picture of how language evolves, Riker is tracing a very specific migration of clinical terms.
What do you mean?
Think about words like harm, trauma, boundaries, gaslighting. These words started in the DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. They have very specific, very limited clinical meanings intended for use by psychiatrists dealing with severe abuse or pathology.
But they don't stay in the therapist's office. They get transmuted into the jargon of middle school SEL handbooks.
Yes, they get simplified for children. And from there, they metastasize through TikTok therapy culture and Instagram infographics until they become weaponized, everyday slang. Riker argues this language is now used by teenagers to orchestrate literal power takeovers against their own parents in their own homes.
Give me an example of how that works in practice.
Riker uses the example of a teenager who gets in trouble and tells her father she is setting a boundary by refusing to listen to his discipline.
Oh, wow.
Or claiming he is gaslighting her by disagreeing with her version of events. She isn't demonstrating emotional maturity or healthy self-actualization. She is cloaking standard teenage defiance in the unassailable clinical guise of self-preservation.
The parent is completely trapped. The parent can't even identify what's happening, which is just standard teenage rebellion, without instantly being labeled hostile, abusive, or unempathetic by the vocabulary itself. It's like the language itself is a spell that disarms you before you can even speak.
That's exactly how she sees it.
So, what does this all mean? How does a parent or a society even begin to counter an institutional apparatus that has captured the very vocabulary of care? This brings us to segment 6, the return to logos and the call to arms.
Riker's proposed solution is sweeping. She calls it the return to logos, and she capitalizes logos. She defines it as a deliberate, unyielding return to reason, to duty, and to biological reality.
She gives a very intense, very practical directive to parents reading the book. She says, stop validating every single feeling.
Yes.
Take the 30-day feelings ledger the school sent home and throw it in the trash. She wants parents to proactively teach their children that boredom, frustration, sadness, and interpersonal conflict are the baseline, inescapable conditions of human life. They are not pathologies requiring a clipboard, a counselor, or a diagnosis.
She essentially wants parents to break the tantrum to triumph loop in their own kitchens.
How so?
When a toddler whines about putting away their toys, instead of kneeling down, getting at eye level and whispering, "I see you're feeling frustrated right now," in that very specific outpatient therapist voice we all know.
Right, yeah.
She says parents should simply say, "Stop whining and do your chore."
Just flat out behavioral expectation, no emotional processing required. And she has particular intense venom for the word safe, doesn't she?
She absolutely does. She calls the word safe the deadliest spell in the modern progressive lexicon. And her reasoning is astute. Safe has been subtly redefined over the last decade, from meaning physical security like being safe from a fire or a physical assault, to meaning emotional insulation.
Right. I don't feel safe now just means I am encountering an idea I strongly disagree with.
Exactly. The moment a child on a playground or an adult in a corporate boardroom claims they feel unsafe in a conversation, It operates as a one-way veto.
It just ends the conversation.
It instantly shuts down all logical debate, bypassing the rational brain entirely, and demands absolute capitulation from reality. You cannot argue with unsafe, you can only apologize. Riker wants parents to banish this usage of the word from their homes entirely.
But what I found fascinating and frankly deeply surprising, given everything we've just discussed, is her critique of conservative alternatives to SEL. Because as a listener, you were probably thinking, okay, she clearly hates modern progressive SEL, so she must be advocating for a return to traditional conservative schooling. She must want us all to join classical education co-ops and read the great books.
But she attacks that too.
Yes. This is where her specific radical feminist ideology really crystallizes, and it sets her apart from standard right-wing critiques of education.
Fine.
She fiercely warns parents against simply retreating to classical education models.
Right.
But why? If she wants a return to logos and reason, isn't that exactly what classical education claims to offer?
She argues that historically, every civilizational renaissance or organized return to classical logic has always coincided with the brutal systemic suppression of female power.
Oh, interesting.
She points out that the historical Renaissance gave us Michelangelo and Da Vinci, yes, but it also gave us the European witch trials. The American founding gave us the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, the ultimate documents of logos, but it also gave us coverture law, where married women were legally considered the property of their husbands with no sovereign identity of their own.
So she looks at the modern conservative classical movement, the push to read Aesop's fables, to study Latin, to return to agrarian roots, and she sees it as just another patriarchal trap.
Exactly.
She says Aesop was a male fabulist teaching hierarchical, compliant moral lessons. She argues that the romanticization of the homestead or the garden hoe just reduces women's hands to calloused instruments for male landowners.
She is carving out an incredibly difficult third path. She doesn't want the progressive, matriarchal cult of SEL, which she believes replaces reality with feelings. But she also absolutely rejects the traditional patriarchal structure of classical education, which she believes subjugates women's intellect.
It's an incredibly fine needle she's trying to thread. She wants the logos, she wants reason, logic, stoicism, and an acknowledgement of biological reality, but she fundamentally believes the logos has been stolen from the feminine over centuries and must be violently reclaimed.
Right.
She is calling for a fierce parental sovereignty that rejects bureaucratic oversight entirely, but one that raises strong, fierce, sovereign women and men who are governed by logic but not subjugated by traditional gender roles.
It is a massive philosophical undertaking she is demanding of her readers. Yeah. She is essentially asking parents to invent a new sociology from scratch in their living rooms.
Which, realistically, is incredibly difficult, perhaps even contradictory, to implement in the real world. I mean, how do you reject all modern educational psychology, reject classical tradition, and somehow perfectly calibrate a child's emotional stoicism on your own?
It's a tall order.
But whether you completely agree with this book's premise, or whether you find its rhetoric absolutely appalling, offensive, and paranoid, you have to admit one thing. It forces you to closely, uncomfortably examine the mundane, everyday vocabulary we use with children.
It demands that we ask hard questions of ourselves. When we use this language, are we genuinely teaching our kids resilience? Are we building real capability?
Yeah.
Or are we just manufacturing compliance disguised as wellness? Are we teaching them to be dependent on an authority figure with a clipboard who validates their trauma?
And it brings us right back to our opening hook, that murky diagnostic landscape where the X-ray machine is broken. If the language of empathy and therapy can be so easily, so systematically viewed as a mechanism of control, how do we distinguish between genuine care and institutional management in our own lives?
That's the million-dollar question.
Have we accidentally, with the best of intentions, outsourced our own emotional sovereignty? Have we handed over the keys to our kids' minds, to apps, to HR departments, to school counselors, simply because they use the word care? It's a profound, lingering question that you really can't shake once you hear it.
It truly is. When you start seeing the architecture of therapy speak everywhere, in commercials, in casual conversation, in school emails, it becomes very difficult to unsee it. You start questioning the motive behind every, how are you feeling today?
It really does alter your perspective. Listen, if you want to dive into this explosive, incisive source material yourself, either to enthusiastically agree with it and use it as a manual, or to critically understand the cultural forces that are shaping these massive high-stakes debates about our kids and our schools, you should absolutely buy the ebook.
Highly recommend checking it out.
It's titled Social and Emotional Learning Crippling Children's Self-Regulation and Resilience by Connie Riker, and it is available right now on Amazon Kindle and Google Play Books.
It is definitely a read that will challenge your fundamental assumptions, regardless of where you stand on the political spectrum. It takes no prisoners.
Totally. And you can also follow the ongoing conversation and analysis by following the author directly at Conrad on Substack, as well as on Twitter and YouTube. Finally, one last huge reminder to please like and subscribe to this platform. Thank you so much for taking this long, deep dive with us today. We promise to bring you even more fascinating, in-depth explorations of the world's most thought-provoking sources next time. Keep questioning the muddy waters.